Hey guys, tonight we delve into the grim life of an ancient Egyptian embalmer, a far cry from honor and luxury. Think being an embalmer in ancient Egypt meant honor and riches. Not quite, unless your idea of fun includes brain soup, toxic resins, and the smell of death. Forever. Picture yourself under the blazing Egyptian sun, the kind that bakes the vast desert sands until they shimmer like a mirage. But you're not out there supervising the construction of a grand pyramid, nor are you gliding serenely down the fertile Nile on a papyrus boat contemplating the gods. No. Your path leads elsewhere to a place most people would actively choose to avoid, a district on the edge of town, often bordering the silent, sprawling cities of the dead. This is where the real work of eternity begins, in structures where the air is heavy, and the silence is perhaps only punctuated by the distant howl of a desert dog, the buzzing of flies, or the soft rhythmic chanting of prayers for those who have passed from the world of the living. Let's be honest, if we were to transport you with all your modern sensibilities, your appreciation for germ theory, and your likely aversion to, shall we say, advanced states of human decomposition into this ancient profession, you probably wouldn't survive a single day, or maybe even a full hour. Especially if your toolkit didn't include a supersized bottle of hand sanitizer and perhaps a very, very strong mentholated balm for under your nose. You'd be forgiven for thinking this career path was perhaps not the most glamorous one on offer in the land of the pharaohs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It truly helps the channel find its way to others who might appreciate these quiet journeys into the past. And as always, I'd love it if you'd let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel, connecting us across time and space. Now dim, the lights maybe, turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at a kind of crossroads in your life, perhaps. The option of becoming an embalmer, AWTGBU as they were known, has presented itself. Maybe it's a family trade, a path your father and his father before him walked, or perhaps in a society so deeply invested in the concept of the afterlife, you see it as a vital, even sacred role. You've heard the talk, of course. You know that ensuring a body is properly preserved is crucial for the deceased's K, their life force, and their bay, their soul-like essence, to recognize their form and successfully navigate the perilous journey through the underworld to achieve eternal life in the field of reeds. Without your skilled hands, that journey is compromised, a terrifying thought for any Egyptian. This is the noble sales pitch, isn't it? You are an essential cog in the great cosmic machine of life, death, and rebirth. You are a guardian of tradition, a facilitator of immortality. It sounds important, doesn't it? You might even envision yourself earning respect, perhaps a comfortable living, maybe even a degree of reverence for handling the sacred mysteries of transformation. The priests speak of Osiris, the first mummy, and how his careful preparation by Isis and Anubis set the divine precedent for your craft. You are, in a way, walking in the footsteps of gods. But then there's let's call it the fine print of the job description. The parts that aren't usually highlighted in the glossy papyrus brochures of career opportunities in ancient Thebes or Memphis. You might have imagined a clean temple-like environment, perhaps filled with the gentle aroma of incense and sacred oils. The reality is the Wabet, the pure place, or sometimes the Ibu, the place of purification. These workshops are by necessity often situated a little way off from the main hustle and bustle of daily life, usually on the west bank of the Nile, the land of the setting sun, and thus the land of the dead. And there's a very practical reason for this separation. The work you're about to undertake is not for the faint of heart, or for those with a particularly sensitive sense of smell. The name Pure Place starts to feel like a bit of an ancient Egyptian in-joke pretty quickly, once you get a sense of what truly goes on inside. Historians still argue whether the chief embalmer, the Hari Seshta, or master of secrets, always came from a priestly class, perhaps, with deep knowledge of the accompanying religious rites, or if one could rise from skilled artisan ranks based purely on exceptional technical proficiency and a strong constitution. It's likely a bit of both, depending on the era and the status of the clientele. The truth is, the honor and riches associated with being an embalmer were variable. If you were the chief embalmer for the pharaoh, or a powerful noble, yes, you likely held a respected position and were well compensated. You might even have access to restricted knowledge and sacred texts. But for the many assistants, the cutters, the washers, the wrappers, the cogs in the mummification machine, life was probably more about hard, often unpleasant labor than about accumulating wealth or accolades. You might have thought joining the eternal life industry came with better perks than, say, eternal hand-me-down sandals and a scent that could curdle milk from 50 paces. It's a steady job, certainly in a land where death is a constant companion and meticulous preparation for it a cultural imperative. But glamorous? Not so much. The tools of your new trade are laid out not gleaming instruments of sacred ritual, but functional, often brutal-looking implements, knives of obsidian or flint for making incisions, long bronze or iron, hooks, pots for resins and oils, and endless rolls of linen. Your career counselor, probably a very serious man with a kohl eyeliner game that's way too strong, might have glossed over the constant exposure to human decay and handling of potent, sometimes caustic natural chemicals part of the job description. He probably focused on the bit about serving the gods and ensuring the continuation of life beyond the tomb. You're told your work is wholly deeply spiritual. And in the grand scheme of Egyptian cosmology, it is. Yet day in and day out, you will be confronting the most visceral, physical, and frankly messy aspects of mortality. This creates a certain cognitive dissonance, a gap between the lofty spiritual ideals and the gritty hands-on reality. It's a tension that will define your working life. The ancient Egyptians, as you know, developed their elaborate mummification techniques over millennia. The earliest attempts were simple desert burials where the hot, dry sand naturally desiccated bodies. But as burial practices became more sophisticated with tombs and coffins, artificial mummification became essential. What began in the pre-dynastic period evolved significantly, reaching its zenith of complexity and artistry during the New Kingdom, the era of Tutankhamun and Ramses the Great. This is a mainstream historical fact, something foundational to understanding your role. Now, for a slightly more unusual tidbit, there's some evidence, or at least strong suggestion, that not all materials used in the embalming process were acquired through, let's say, official channels. Some embalmers, particularly those perhaps not at the top of the pay scale, might have engaged in a bit of a side hustle. This could involve the selling of used or excess linens, or perhaps even some of the less critical natron, the natural salt used for drying the body or resins. It's a murky area, and certainly not something that would have been advertised, but human nature and the need to make a living are constants across time. Imagine trying to haggle over slightly used mummy wrappings. Only one previous owner, barely deceased. As you stand on the threshold of this career, perhaps your dream of being revered, maybe even getting a small pyramid of your own, one day as a reward for your pious service, begins to encounter the first whispers of a more pungent reality. Yeah, about that personal pyramid. You're more likely to get a complimentary lifelong subscription to Eau de Deceased, a personal fragrance that, as you'll soon discover, never quite washes off, no matter how vigorously you scrub with sand and Nile water. The true honor of your position might be in the quiet knowledge of your skill, and the riches might simply be the ability to feed your family. The sun begins to dip lower, casting long shadows from the palm trees. The air cools slightly, but a different kind of heaviness is settling in your mind. You're approaching the waybed. Even from a distance, you can detect a faint, unfamiliar, and deeply unsettling aroma, mixing with the usual desert dust and the scent of the distant river. It's a smell that hints at things best, left undisturbed, a smell that will soon become the constant backdrop to your life. The allure of serving the gods and ensuring eternal life is about to meet the undeniable earthy truth of what that service actually entails, starting with an olfactory introduction you'll never forget. You take a breath, what you hope is a steadying one, and step across the threshold of the wabat. The faint, unsettling aroma you detected from a distance now explodes around you, a physical presence that seems to coat your tongue and claw at the back of your throat. It's an immediate, overwhelming assault on your senses. This isn't just one smell. It's a complex, unholy symphony of odors, a rich tapestry woven from threads of decay, pungent chemicals, cloying sweet spices, and something ancient, dusty, and profoundly sad. There's a damp, earthy bass note like freshly turned soil in a forgotten crypt, overlaid with the sharp, metallic tang of old blood, even if none is immediately visible. Then comes the almost sickly sweetness of decomposing flesh, a smell that tricks your brain for a split second before it registers the horror. Mingled with this are the more intentional scents, the heavy resinous perfume of myrrh, the slightly camphorous bite of frankincense, and perhaps the vague salty dryness of the natron that lies in great heaps or shallow trays waiting to do its desiccating work. Your first instinct is to clamp a hand over your nose and mouth, to recoil, perhaps even to retch. The more seasoned embalmers, busy at their tasks, might offer a fleeting, unsympathetic glance or a wry, knowing smirk. You quickly realize that Eau de Eternal Rest is not going to be a top seller in the local marketplace, no matter how attractively you package it. This isn't a scent that stays politely within the confines of the workshop walls. Oh no, it has ambition. It wants to travel. It wants to cling. You can already feel it settling onto your linen tunic, seeping into the fibers of your sandals, trying to make a home in your hair under your fingernails. It's invasive, pervasive, and you have the sinking feeling that this perfume, death's eternal perfume, is now your signature fragrance, whether you like it or not. You see bodies in various stages of the mummification process, some newly arrived and covered with simple shrouds, others further along, perhaps undergoing the lengthy drying period, and some nearly ready for their final wrapping. Each contributes its own unique olfactory verse to the overwhelming chorus. The natron, a natural salt mixture, primarily composed of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, harvested from dry lake beds like the Wadi el Natron, is the star player in desiccation. Its historical use is a well-documented fact. The ancient Egyptians empirically discovered its remarkable ability to draw out bodily fluids, a process critical to halting putrefaction. The entire mummification, from the initial washing to the final wrapping, traditionally took around 70 days. This period wasn't arbitrary. It corresponded to the length of time the star Sirius associated with the goddess Isis, and the concept of rebirth through her mourning for Osiris was hidden from view in the sky. So your 70-day work schedule is cosmically aligned, even if it feels like an eternity spent in an olfactory purgatory. You try breathing shallowly through your mouth, but the taste smell is just as potent. Your eyes might water, stinging from the acrid fumes of certain preservatives, or simply from the sheer intensity of the airborne particles of, well, everything. Some of the senior embalmers might chew on aromatic seeds or bits of resin like juniper berries, or perhaps even imported peppercorns if they're feeling extravagant. This quirky tidbit, the practice of chewing on spices, could be for ritual purity to ward off malevolent spirits drawn to the dead, or more pragmatically, it might be a desperate attempt to create a small, more pleasant olfactory bubble for themselves, a way to overpower the ever-present miasma, if only in their own mouths. It's a bit like trying to fight a flood with a teacup, but you can see the appeal. Your new colleagues, seasoned veterans of this scentscape, just give you that knowing look, a look that says, "Welcome to the club, kid." You'll stop noticing it quite so acutely around the same time you forget what fresh bread baking in the village, or the clean scent of lotus blossoms on the Nile, or even the smell of your own mother's cooking truly smells like. Or perhaps you never quite stop noticing it. You just develop a compartment in your brain where the horror of it is stored, allowing you to function. The human mind is remarkably adaptable, even if the nose remains a stubborn sentinel. Historians still argue whether the specific blend of aromatic substances lavishly used in the more expensive embalming processes, the myrrh, cassia, cinnamon, and various sacred oils, was primarily for odor control, or if their selection was dictated more by their perceived magical and religious efficacy in repelling evil spirits and consecrating the body. Another angle to this debate considers whether the ancient Egyptians empirically understood that some of these resins and spices possessed antimicrobial properties, which, in addition to the natron, actively aided in the preservation process by inhibiting bacterial and fungal growth. It's likely a combination of all these factors, a practical attempt to make the work slightly less unbearable, a profound spiritual necessity, and perhaps an accidental scientific boost. But for you standing here in the thick of it, the academic debate is secondary to the immediate reality. The smell is a living entity. It has weight texture. It clings to the damp stone walls of the waybet, to the wooden embalming tables, to the piles of linen waiting to be torn into strips. It's in the dust motes, dancing in the shafts of light that pierce the gloom from high, narrow windows. On hot days, it intensifies, becoming a soupy, suffocating blanket. On cooler days, it might recede slightly, but it's always there, a loyal, unwelcome companion. You might find yourself wondering how anyone endures this day after day, year after year. The answer probably lies in a combination of necessity duty and a profound desensitization that borders on a kind of professional numbness. Or perhaps it's a testament to the power of belief, the conviction that this smelly, unpleasant work is vital for eternity. On the bright side, as you'll quickly learn, you'll never have to worry about personal space on the ferry home or in the crowded marketplace. People will give you a wide berth. A very, very wide berth. Like they might suddenly remember urgent business on the other side of the Nile when they see you approaching. This social distancing isn't for fear of contagion in the modern sense, but due to concepts of ritual impurity, a topic we'll delve into more deeply later. For now, though, your world has shrunk to the dimensions of this smell. It is the air you breathe, the atmosphere you move through. It will be the first thing you register when you arrive for work, and the last lingering ghost of a scent that follows you home, clinging stubbornly to your very being, a constant reminder of your chosen or perhaps fated path. This eternal perfume is the invisible uniform of your profession, more indelible than any badge or title. And as you take your first tentative steps further into the workshop, you know with a chilling certainty that this scent is now a part of you. The question is, will you ever smell anything else quite the same way again? As the initial olfactory shockwave from Section 2 begins to, well, not fade, but perhaps your senses are just screaming so loudly they're starting to go hoarse. Your eyes slowly adjust to the dim perpetual twilight of the Wabet. You find yourself in a space that feels less like a workshop and more like a preparatory chamber for the underworld itself, a kind of gloomy antechamber to eternity. The term workshop might conjure images of bustling activity under bright sunlight, but this is something else entirely. It's the tomb's toxic embrace, a place where the living toil intimately with the dead, and the environment itself seems to conspire against comfort and, frankly, robust health. Light is a precious, grudging commodity here. Perhaps a few high, narrow slits near the ceiling allow slivers of the harsh Egyptian sun to penetrate, cutting through the gloom in dusty, ethereal beams. These openings are likely small by design to minimize the entry of desert sand and the relentless heat, but they do little to truly illuminate the space. More common are the flickering, smoky flames of oil lamps perched precariously on ledges or carried by hand. They cast dancing, unreliable shadows that make the corners of the room writhe with unseen possibilities, and they contribute their own sooty residue to the already thick air. You'll get very good at working by feel your fingers, learning the textures of linen, the coolness of stone tools, the yielding nature of flesh, even in the near darkness. You start to suspect the pure place designation for the workshop was an early example of ironic branding, much like a modern health drink that's 90% sugar. The air itself is a tangible presence. We've already established its unique aromatic profile. But beyond the complex bouquet of decay and incense, it's heavy, stagnant, and disturbingly particulate. It's a veritable soup of airborne matter. There's the fine, pervasive dust from the natron, which, while excellent for desiccating bodies, is less than ideal for your respiratory system. Each breath feels like you're inhaling a little bit of the desert itself, mixed with microscopic linen fibers from the endless tearing and wrapping powdered resins that hang in the air like a mystical yet irritating fog. And yes, tiny desiccated particles of organic matter. Forget fancy air purifiers. Your main atmospheric filter is your own lungs, which, by the way, are probably lodging a formal complaint with your sinuses and bronchial tubes. Ventilation, if it exists at all, is rudimentary. The same small openings that offer minimal light offer minimal air exchange. This means the atmosphere within the wabet remains largely trapped, stewing in its own concoction of fumes and particles. On a blazing Egyptian afternoon, the heat inside can become stifling, pressing down on you, making the already arduous work even more draining. Conversely, some embalming places, particularly those associated with wealthier patrons or rock-cut tomb complexes, might be situated in cooler, more subterranean locations. This might offer some relief from the sun, but it could also enhance the feeling of being entombed, the air cold, damp, and equally stagnant. The historical fact is that the wabet, or pure place, and sometimes the ibu, or tent of purification, were almost always strategically located near the necropolis, the city of the dead. This was for the practical reason of minimizing the distance the deceased needed to be transported, but also because the activities performed there rendered the area, and by extension, those who worked there, ritually impure, and thus best kept separate from the spaces of everyday life. Now let's talk about the delightful array of materials you're working with day in and day out. We've mentioned natron, piled in bags or shallow troughs. It's the cornerstone of mummification. But this natural salt mixture, so effective at drawing moisture from tissues, is also incredibly drying to your skin. Your hands constantly in contact with it will likely become chapped, cracked, and perpetually thirsty, no matter how much lanolin-rich unguent you might try to use, if you can even afford it. Then there are the resins: frankincense, myrrh, cedar resin, and others often imported at great expense. These are crucial for anointing the body, sealing incisions, and for their aromatic and preservative qualities. When heated, to make them more malleable, they release thick, pungent smoke. While some of these aromas are indeed pleasant in small doses, inhaling concentrated resin smoke for hours on end in a poorly ventilated space is another story. Your throat might feel perpetually scratchy. Your eyes might sting, and who knows what the long-term effects might be. In later periods, bitumen or pitch became a common ingredient, especially for the final coating of the mummy or coffin. Heating this tar-like substance produces truly noxious, acrid fumes that you can feel coating your lungs. It's sticky, messy, and adds another layer of toxicity to your working conditions. Palm wine is frequently used for cleansing the body cavity and the skin. While it has disinfectant properties due to its alcohol content, its fumes also contribute to the heady, close atmosphere of the workshop. And then there are the various oils and unguents, some fragrant, some simply functional. Their specific compositions often a closely guarded secret of the master embalmer. Some of these concoctions might be perfectly benign. Others could contain irritants or substances that turn rancid, adding yet another layer to the olfactory and chemical assault. You might notice that some of the older embalmers have certain occupational tells. Perhaps their hands are permanently stained a deep brown or black from years of handling resins and bitumen. The color seeped deep into the whorls of their fingerprints. Maybe many of them share a persistent hacking cough, a wabet cough, or chronically inflamed eyes. These are the quirky, uncelebrated markers of your trade badges of honor you never asked for. In an era before occupational health and safety regulations, a concept that would have made an Egyptian foreman laugh heartily, probably while inhaling a cloud of natron dust, these ailments were likely just accepted as part of the job. Historians still argue whether the architectural design of embalming workshops prioritized ritual purity and the symbolic separation of the dead from the living above all else, or if practical considerations, like attempting some rudimentary ventilation and achieving functional, if minimal lighting, were equally important, or perhaps even seen as interconnected. The truth is, the evidence is sparse, and conditions likely varied enormously depending on the period, the location, and the status of the embalmers and their clientele. But it's safe to say that airy and bright were probably not the primary design goals. So your workspace is a dim, stuffy tomb-like enclosure filled with the dust of ages, the smoke of potent resins, and the invisible but palpable miasma of things best left undisturbed. On your list of things I wish my career counselor mentioned, chronic inhalation of desiccated corpse dust and resin smoke is definitely climbing the charts right above perpetual mummy finger smell and the existential dread of spending your best years in a poorly lit charnel house. This constant, intimate exposure to hazardous materials, coupled with the ever-present smell and the gloomy surroundings, creates an environment that doesn't just challenge your physical endurance, but also subtly works on your spirit. It's an embrace, yes, but the cloying, inescapable embrace of a place steeped in death chemicals and a profound, unsettling stillness. The silence here isn't peaceful. It's the silence of waiting, of processes slowly, inexorably unfolding, and you are right in the middle of it, breathing it all in. The workday, such as it is, in the timeless, gloomy expanse of the Wabe, eventually draws to a close. You straighten your aching back, wipe your perpetually stained hands on a piece of already soiled linen, and step out from the workshop's oppressive embrace. The desert air, even laden with its usual dust and the distant smells of the living world, cooking fires, livestock, the faint perfume of blooming acacia, if the season is right, feels almost shockingly fresh by comparison. For a fleeting moment, you take a deeper breath, a luxury you couldn't afford inside. But then you realize, with a familiar sinking feeling, that the Waybet hasn't entirely let you go. Its signature scent, that complex miasma of death chemicals and ancient secrets we explored in Section 2, has come with you. It's an invisible shroud clinging to your tunic, woven into the fibers of your sandals, settled in your hair, and seemingly embedded deep within your very skin. You might make your way to the Nile's edge, or to a designated washing area, to scrub yourself with handfuls of abrasive sand and whatever rudimentary soap-like substances are available. Perhaps something made from animal fat and natron ash. You splash the cool water over your face, your arms trying to wash away the grime and the lingering psychic residue of the day's work alongside the physical. But the smell is a stubborn companion. It laughs at mere water. It scoffs at sand. It might diminish fractionally from a Category 5 olfactory hurricane down to a persistent, noticeable Category 2, but it never truly vanishes. There's always that underlying note, that faint but unmistakable reminder of where you've been and what you do. You are, in essence, a walking, talking advertisement for the embalming trade, though not one that draws eager customers to your person. As you walk back towards the village, or the specific quarter where you live, you notice the subtle and sometimes not so subtle reactions of others. It's like an invisible barrier parts the way for you. Market vendors who were cheerfully haggling with the previous customer might suddenly become very engrossed in rearranging their onions as you approach. Women chatting by a well might find their conversation abruptly drying up their eyes, darting towards you, and then quickly away. Children, in their unfiltered honesty, might stop their game's point and whisper to their mothers, who then shush them and pull them closer. You briefly consider marketing your personal aroma as Mummy Dearest, the fragrance that guarantees you a double seat on the ferry. But the royalties from a potential customer base of one yourself seem unpromising. This isn't just about a bad smell, though that's certainly a significant part of it. Your profession places you in a state of ritual impurity. The ancient Egyptians had a profound understanding of purity, WB, and its opposite impurity, BWT. Contact with the dead by its very nature was a powerful source of ritual contamination. This is a mainstream historical fact. Maintaining ritual purity was essential for interacting with the sacred, for entering temples, and for participating in many religious festivals. As an embalmer, you are in constant intimate contact with death. Therefore, you are often considered ritually unclean. A state that others might fear could be contagious, not in a medical sense, but in a spiritual one. They don't want your uncleanliness rubbing off on them, potentially offending the gods or bringing ill fortune. So the parting of the ways you experience is fueled by a mixture of visceral aversion to the smell of mortality and a deeper culturally ingrained fear of spiritual contamination. You are a living, breathing reminder of death and unwelcome specter at the feast of life. It's a lonely path you walk. Friendships might be strained or confined to others who share similarly unclean professions. Perhaps a tanner who also works with unpleasant animal remains, or a pig herder, as pigs were sometimes considered impure animals. Your love life, let's just say it's less romantic Nile cruise under the stars with a shared cup of sweet wine, and more long-distance admiration from several villages away, possibly communicated via very understanding carrier pigeon. The simple human need for closeness, for casual touch, for acceptance, becomes a complicated negotiation. There's a quirky practical aspect to this social distancing. Historical and archaeological evidence suggests that in some larger towns and cities, workers in professions considered unclean, including embalmers, may have lived in specific segregated districts. This wasn't necessarily a formal ghetto imposed by law, but more a natural gravitation of those sharing a similar social status, and frankly, a similar olfactory profile to live in closer proximity away from those who might shun them. It created a community of sorts, a place where you weren't constantly the odd one out, where the smell of your neighbor was perhaps just as distinctive as your own. Within these communities, life might have had a semblance of normalcy, but the broader isolation from the mainstream of society would have remained. You become exceptionally good at solitary hobbies. Competitive beetle racing, perhaps, if you can find a beetle that isn't too put off. Or maybe you develop an intricate knowledge of the desert stars, your companions, in the quiet hours when the rest of the village is asleep, and your unique aroma is less likely to offend. At least the scorpions and desert foxes don't complain about the smell. Much. The psychological toll of this constant low-level ostracization can be significant. It requires a certain fortitude, a resilience, or perhaps a carefully constructed emotional shell to navigate a world that subtly and sometimes overtly rejects your very presence. Historians still argue about the degree of social mobility for embalmers and their families. While it's clear that some chief embalmers, particularly those serving royalty or the temple elite, could achieve high status, accumulate wealth, and even receive their own elaborate burials, it's debated whether the average embalmer, the skilled artisan toiling in the wabed, could ever fully escape the pervasive social stigma associated with their profession, regardless of their technical skill or personal piety. Could their children marry into families outside the embalmer's circle? Could they fully participate in all aspects of community religious life? The answers are complex and likely varied across Egypt's long history and diverse localities. The forever aspect of your professional scent becomes a defining feature of your existence. It's not like a construction worker who can wash off the dust and grime at the end of the day and blend back into society. Your work literally soaks into you. The oils, the resins, the faint but persistent signature of natron and desiccated tissue. They become part of your personal atmosphere. Even on your days off, if you have any, the scent lingers, a ghostly calling card announcing your profession before you even speak. It's a heavy burden to carry this mark of your trade, this outcast scent that isolates you even as you perform one of the most spiritually essential services in your society. You are a paradox, ritually impure, yet indispensable, shunned, yet sought after, when death inevitably calls. And as you finally reach your dwelling, perhaps in that quieter, more understanding part of town, you know that tomorrow you will return to the Wabbit, add another layer to your unique perfume, and continue to walk this solitary scented path. The scent of your own being, that persistent perfume of the Wabe we discussed in Section 4, is a constant reminder of your solitary path. But now, personal concerns and social standings must recede into the background. You are back within the dim, heavy air of the embalming workshop, and a new, deceased individual, or perhaps one whose preliminary preparations are complete, lies before you on the cool stone or wooden slab. It's time to begin one of the more particular stages of your craft, a task that requires a unique blend of precision, fortitude, and a certain detachment. You approach the still form, perhaps murmuring a brief customary invocation to Anubis, the jackal-headed god who presides over mummification and the afterlife, asking for his guidance to ensure this soul's safe passage. Before you, the body lies inert, a silent testament to a life concluded. It is your sacred duty and your daily grind to prepare this vessel for its journey into eternity. And one of the first, most crucial, and arguably most unsettling internal preparations involves the contents of the cranial cavity. You now prepare for the daunting and delicate task of removing the deceased's brain, not through some grand incision, but through the narrow passages of the nose. Now, why this seemingly brutal and intricate procedure? To our modern understanding, where the brain is the revered seat of consciousness and identity, this sounds like a profound desecration. But for the ancient Egyptians, the heart, or ib, was the core of a person's being, their intellect, emotion, memory, and will. The heart was weighed in the hall of Maat against the feather of truth. The heart was what needed to be preserved carefully within the body, or in a canopic jar. The brain, on the other hand, the Egyptians didn't assign it much importance at all. It was often considered little more than cranial stuffing, the marrow of the head, and more critically, a significant source of moisture and potential putrefaction that could swiftly undermine the entire mummification process if left in place. So its removal was a pragmatic, if grisly, necessity for the long-term preservation of the head. and by extension, the recognizable form of the deceased, which was vital for the Ka and Bial. You turn to your specialized toolkit, a collection of implements that would likely cause a modern surgeon to raise a quizzical eyebrow. There, glinting faintly in the lamplight, is the star of this particular show, a long, slender rod, usually crafted from bronze or iron. It's often described as a hook, but these tools came in various forms. Some may have had a coiled auger-like tip designed to break up and liquefy the brain tissue. Others might have a simpler bent hook or a small loop at the end intended for extracting the macerated matter. Alongside this, you might have a fine chisel and a small mallet reserved for carefully perforating the ethmoid bone, the thin, spongy bone at the roof of the nose that separates the nasal cavity from the brain cavity. You select your preferred instrument, its cool metal familiar in your grasp. You've used these tools, or ones, very like them countless times. Yet there's always a slight tension, a need for absolute focus before you begin. You look at the brain hook then, at the still serene, or perhaps not so serene face of the deceased, and can't help but think that minimally invasive surgery was not a concept high on ancient Egypt's medical research agenda. This is where the stomach of steel part of your job description truly kicks in. It's not just about overcoming revulsion. It's about maintaining a surgeon's steadiness without the benefit of modern anatomical charts or sterile conditions. You take a slow, deliberate breath, trying to center yourself to enter that zone of professional calm, where your hands know exactly what to do, almost independent of your conscious thought. Your internal monologue might be a strange mix of practical reminders and dark humor. All right, brain, you've had a good run. Time to evict you to make room for, well, mostly emptiness and some nice linen stuffing later on. Rent's due, and you're being replaced by a more minimalist aesthetic for your eternal lease. Physical preparation of the deceased is minimal but crucial. The head must be positioned carefully, perhaps tilted back slightly, to give you the best angle of approach through the nostrils. You might gently cleanse the external nasal passages if needed. The aim is to be as efficient and as neat as possible, not just for the sake of the deceased's appearance, which is paramount, but also to make the subsequent stages of preservation more effective. A botched excerebration, as this process is known, could lead to facial disfigurement or incomplete removal, hindering the drying process. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, provided one of the earliest written accounts of Egyptian mummification practices, including this method of brain removal. He described how for the best and most expensive type of embalming, they draw out the brain through the nostrils with an iron hook, and what they cannot reach, with the hook they mash up and draw out with drugs. This historical fact confirms that the technique was well established and recognized even by outsiders as a key, if rather shocking, part of the elite embalming process. However, not every mummification was a top-tier affair. As a quirky, or perhaps frugal tidbit, it's known that sometimes not all of the brain was meticulously extracted. In some cases, it might have been simply scrambled or liquefied within the cranial cavity and left there to desiccate along with the rest of the head, especially if the mummification was a less expensive one, or if the embalmer was less skilled or simply pressed for time. The thoroughness of the procedure could vary considerably. Sometimes, after liquefying and removing as much as possible, The cranial cavity might be rinsed with palm wine or infused with resins. Historians still argue about the exact range of instruments used for excerebration and the consistency of the technique across different dynasties and social classes. Archaeological finds of these specific slender hooks and probes are relatively rare compared to other burial goods, and textual descriptions like that of Herodotus can be somewhat general, leaving room for interpretation regarding the precise mechanics and variations in the tools and methods employed. Were there regional differences? Did certain workshops have their own patented brain extraction gadgets? We can only speculate based on the limited evidence. But for you in this moment, theory and historical debate are far from your mind. You are poised, tool in hand. The lamplight casts deep shadows across the deceased's face, making the nostrils seem like dark tunnels into the unknown. This is the part of the job where you really hope you remembered which end of the long, thin hook is the gentle persuasion and internal stirring end, and which, if mishandled, could inadvertently become the "oops, I've just redecorated the inside of the skull with bone fragments" end. No pressure, of course. The silence of the wabe seems to deepen, broken only by the distant buzz of a persistent fly or the soft drip of water from a poorly sealed jar. All your focus narrows to the point of entry, the delicate bones you must navigate, and the unseen soft matter within. The first gentle probe is about to begin. The moment of quiet focus we left you in at the end of Section 5 dissolves into careful action. With steady hands, honed by practice, and an almost intuitive understanding of cranial anatomy learned the hard way. No doubt you begin the delicate insertion of the long metal hook into one of the deceased's nostrils. Your touch must be firm yet precise. The first objective is to penetrate the ethmoid bone, that fragile honeycomb barrier separating the nasal cavity from the cranial vault. You might use the sharpened tip of the hook itself, or perhaps a small chisel tapped gently with a mallet to create the initial opening. There's a slight resistance, a subtle give, perhaps a faint dry crackle that only you, in your intense proximity, can discern. Success. Access to the brain cavity is achieved. Now the real artistry, if one can call it that, of nasal brain extraction begins. The interior of the skull is not a hollow, empty space that its contents will simply pour out of. The brain is a soft, almost custard-like organ, and it needs to be persuaded. This is where the strong stomach component of your job comes to the fore alongside those steady hands. Using the hook, which might have a whisk-like or spiral end, you begin to gently but persistently stir, agitate, and break apart the brain matter. The aim is to liquefy or macerate the tissue into a consistency that can be drawn out or drained through the relatively small opening you've created. It's a slow, methodical process. You're working blind, relying entirely on the tactile feedback transmitted through the metal rod, feeling for the contours of the inner skull, taking care not to be too aggressive, yet ensuring you reach all areas. You try not to think too hard about what you're currently coaxing out through a nostril. Best to imagine it's just very stubborn, slightly lumpy porridge that requires a bit of enthusiastic stirring. Yes, porridge, that's the ticket. A very special, once-in-a-lifetime kind of porridge that you definitely won't be serving for breakfast. The term brain soup, which we cheekily mentioned at the start of our journey, isn't entirely inaccurate, though perhaps a little too culinary for comfort. Let's call it a cerebral slurry, or cranial contents for politeness. Bit by bit, fragment by fragment, or as a viscous grayish fluid the brain matter is extracted. You might use the hooked end of your instrument to carefully draw out pieces of tissue. Sometimes, the head of the deceased is tilted at various angles to encourage the liquefied contents to drain. A quirky tidbit from some accounts suggests that embalmers might even turn the body onto its side or completely face down for a period, allowing gravity to assist in emptying the cranial cavity through the perforated nostril. A shallow bowl or container would be placed underneath to collect the discharge, not for any ceremonial purpose, but simply to manage the mess. You might also employ a narrow spatula-like instrument to help scoop or guide the material out. This isn't a single swift action, but a patient, repetitive series of insertions, manipulations, and withdrawals until you're satisfied that the majority of the contents have been removed. This part of the process is colloquially known among your colleagues as scrambling the mummy's thoughts for an eternity of peace. Though you're pretty sure the deceased is well past the point of having strong opinions on your technique or anything else for that matter. It's this kind of gallows humor, shared only within the privacy of the wabet, that helps you and your fellow artisans cope with the daily realities of your profession. Your focus is intense. A slip of the hook, too much pressure, or a misjudged angle could potentially damage the nasal septum, the bridge of the nose, or even the eye sockets from within, leading to an undesirable sunken or distorted appearance of the face once the desiccation process is complete. And the face, above all, must remain recognizable for the K. Physical examination of ancient Egyptian mummies. A key historical fact has frequently confirmed this very method of excerebration. Broken ethmoid bones are a common finding, and CT scans have often revealed that traces of desiccated brain matter, or the linen packing material used to fill the void, sometimes remain within the cranial vault. This tells us that while the ideal was complete removal, the practical reality working with rudimentary tools in less than ideal conditions meant the process wasn't always 100% efficient. Perfection was the aim, but competence was the standard. Once you believe you've removed as much of the brain as possible, the now largely empty cranial cavity might be further cleansed. This could involve flushing it with palm wine, which has antiseptic properties, or inserting strips of linen soaked in resins like myrrh or cedar oil. These substances would help to dry out any remaining tissue, inhibit bacterial growth, and perfume the cavity. Sometimes the skull was simply packed with linen to help it retain its shape during the subsequent drying and wrapping stages. You develop a real appreciation for skulls that come with, shall we say, pre-thinned ethmoid bones, or particularly accommodating nasal passages. It's the little things, the small mercies of anatomy that can make your workday just that tiny bit brighter, or at least slightly less arduous and time-consuming. Historians and archaeologists still debate the exact methods used to dispose of the extracted brain matter. Was it simply discarded as biological waste, perhaps buried in a designated pit near the wabet? Or was there any residual ritual significance attached to its disposal, however minor, given that it originated from the human head, even if the organ itself was deemed unimportant for the afterlife? Textual sources are largely silent on this rather mundane yet intriguing detail. It was, after all, just waste product. From your perspective, something to be gotten rid of efficiently, so you could move on to the more spiritually significant parts of the preservation. With the cranial vault now addressed, a strange sort of emptiness pervades the head of the deceased. An emptiness you have meticulously created. There's a grim sense of accomplishment, perhaps, at completing such a challenging and delicate task without causing undue outward damage. You carefully clean your instruments, the long hook now bearing witness to its recent intimate work. The air around you still carries that inescapable perfume of your profession. But now, there's a fresh specific note added to it, a testament to the internal transformations you are facilitating. The first major hurdle in the physical preparation is cleared. Now, your attention and your blades must turn south towards the secrets held within the torso. With the challenging task of excerebration completed, a certain grim satisfaction might settle upon you, but there's no time to dwell. The cranial vault, now mostly empty, save for perhaps some linen or resin, is just one part of the intricate puzzle of preparing a human form for eternity. Your attention and your specialized tools now shift downwards from the seat of unrecognized intellect to the bustling, crowded metropolis of the torso. The real race against decay begins here within the body cavity, where the moist vital organs reside. If left in place, they would swiftly break down, turning your careful work into a soggy, unsalvageable mess. Their removal is paramount, not just for preservation, but because these organs, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines, hold their own significance for the afterlife and will receive their own special treatment. Before the first cut is made, there's often a palpable pause, a moment freighted with ritual significance. According to some classical writers like Diodorus Siculus, the role of making the primary incision into the abdomen was assigned to a specific individual, sometimes called the parachist or the ripper. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart, nor one that came with accolades. You take a deep breath. Opening remarks. As your less reverent apprentice sometimes cheekily calls this crucial step are about to be made. You've warned him repeatedly about his puns during sacred work, but the boy learns slowly, if at all. The paraskist, armed with an Ethiopian stone, typically a very sharp blade of obsidian or flint, chosen for its ritual purity and keen edge, would make the necessary cut. Then legend has it, he would be symbolically cursed, perhaps even chased, and have stones thrown gently, one hopes at him, by the other attendants, as if to punish him for defiling the sacred vessel of the deceased. It was a way of ritually transferring any blame for the act of cutting the body, preserving the purity of the chief embalmer, and the overall sanctity of the proceedings. Historians still debate the exact ritualistic significance and the universality of this stoning of the paraskist ritual, described by Diodorus Siculus, questioning whether it was a literal common practice across all of Egypt and all periods, or perhaps an exaggerated or localized account meant to dramatically emphasize the profound sacredness of the human body and the gravity of violating its wholeness, even for such a vital purpose. Whether you are this designated parashist yourself, or you direct another to perform the act, the moment is undeniably critical. You or your chosen specialist select the blade. It might be a beautiful piece of obsidian volcanic glass, fractured to an edge far sharper than most metals of the time, its dark surface gleaming in the lamplight. It feels cool and smooth in your hand, a tool of immense power and responsibility. You wield this obsidian blade with the quiet confidence of someone who knows that "oops, wrong spot," or "is that supposed to look like that?" are not phrases the client's grieving family, or indeed the gods overseeing your work, particularly like to hear at this delicate juncture. The incision itself is precise, a practiced stroke. The standard location, a well-established historical fact, was on the left flank of the abdomen. Why the left? Perhaps it offered the most straightforward access to the majority of the organs slated for removal. Or maybe there were deeper symbolic reasons lost to time, connected to the cardinal directions or mythological precedents. The cut is typically several inches long enough to allow your hand and smaller tools access to the cavity within. You place the keen edge against the skin, and with a swift, sure movement, the skin parts. A thin, red line appears, quickly welling, though significant bleeding is usually minimal, as the deceased's circulation has, of course, long since ceased. The layers of subcutaneous fat and muscle give way under the blade's sharp persuasion. And then you're in. The abdominal cavity is open. A new wave of smells, different from the cranial contents or the general aroma of the wabet, might subtly rise to meet you. Warmer, more organic, the intimate scent of the body's inner workings now exposed to the air for the first time. It's a pivotal moment. The body is no longer a sealed vessel. It has become a space to be worked within, its hidden architecture laid bare. Peering into the opening, you get your first glimpse of the organs nestled within their moist, dark confines. You don't see a scene of gore, not in the way a battlefield injury might present. Instead, in the dim light, you perceive glistening rounded shapes, subtle variations in color, the deep reddish brown of the liver, the paler, softer forms of the intestines, the spongy texture of the lungs just visible beyond the diaphragm. It's an internal landscape usually hidden from all eyes. This is the original open concept, living just for the internal organs, temporarily, of course. They'll soon get their own custom-fitted deluxe accommodations in special jars like tiny preserved VIPs on a very exclusive afterlife tour. The act of making this incision, this gateway into the core of the deceased, is imbued with a heavy significance. It's a violation, yes, but a sacred one, a necessary trespass undertaken to ensure a far greater journey. You've crossed a threshold. The process of evisceration, the careful removal and preservation of these vital inner parts can now begin in earnest. While the standard was the left flank incision, a quirky tidbit for you is that occasionally mummies have been discovered by archaeologists with the incision made on the right side or in a slightly different location, or even utilizing a different shape or approach. These anomalies suggest variations in workshop practices, perhaps the personal preference or handedness of a particular chief embalmer regional traditions, or even dare one suggest a rare mistake that the skilled craftsman then had to adapt to and work with. Every body, and perhaps every embalmer, had their unique points. For now, the critical opening has been achieved. The air enters the breach, and the path is clear for the next equally delicate and profoundly important stage of your work. Your hand, now perhaps ritually purified after the cutting, is ready to reach inside, to begin the careful, respectful separation of the organs from their moorings. The silent, crowded cavity awaits your skilled touch. The incision made at the end of section 7 now gapes slightly, an open doorway into the body's hidden core. With the ritual preliminaries observed, your hand, perhaps guided by a flickering oil lamp held by an assistant, slips into the opening. The internal environment of the body, even in death, can retain a surprising warmth for a time, or it may have already cooled to match the ambient temperature of the wabet. Your fingers, acutely sensitive from years of this tactile work, navigate the slippery, soft, and yielding forms of the internal organs, identifying each by its unique texture, shape, and position within the complex internal architecture. There's a strange intimacy to this moment, a profound exploration of the recently vacated house of a soul. One by one, or sometimes in connected groups, You begin the careful process of detaching these vital residents from their moorings. The lungs, those spongy architects of breath, are nestled high up in the thoracic cavity, protected by the rib cage. Reaching them requires skill, often involving carefully cutting through the diaphragm, the muscular sheet separating the chest from the abdomen. You work gently easing them from their attachments to the trachea and surrounding tissues. Once freed, they are lifted out surprisingly light for their size, their delicate structure now still. Then, you turn your attention to the abdominal contents. The stomach, a J-shaped bag that once held the sustenance of life, is carefully isolated and detached from the esophagus and the small intestine. The liver, a large, dark, wedge-shaped organ rich and vital, is one of the heaviest and most substantial. You maneuver it carefully from its position under the diaphragm on the right side of the body, its smooth surface cool against your hand. The coiled, seemingly endless labyrinth of the intestines, both small and large, must be painstakingly unraveled and separated from the mesentery, the membrane that holds them in place. This can be a long, involved process, requiring patience to ensure the entire length is removed intact as much as possible. It's like a very macabre, very slow-motion version of one of those claw machine games you might see at a village fair, except the prizes are a bit more organic, and you always win. Or at least you'd better, for the sake of a complete mummification. As you work, you develop a certain professional fondness for well-organized internal anatomy. A particularly messy or unusual arrangement of organs, perhaps due to a previous illness or just individual variation, is like an untidy workshop. It just makes the job harder for everyone, especially you, as you try to sort things out in the dim, close confines of the body cavity. Throughout this process, one organ is usually, and most importantly, left undisturbed: the heart. As we've touched upon, the ancient Egyptians believed the heart, the IB, was the seat of intelligence, emotion, and the person's very essence. It was vital for the judgment in the afterlife, where it would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. To remove the heart would be to rob the deceased of their identity and their chance at eternal life. So it typically remains nestled in its place, a silent, crucial witness to your work. Sometimes in certain periods, or according to specific rites, the heart might be removed, carefully wrapped, and then replaced within the chest cavity, often with a protective amulet like a heart scarab. The status of the kidneys, however, is a bit more ambiguous. Classical texts on mummification rarely mention them explicitly, and their presence or absence in examined mummies is inconsistent. There is ongoing scholarly debate regarding their precise treatment. Were they deliberately left in place as spiritually insignificant, simply overlooked in the dim working conditions? Or were they sometimes removed, but not accorded the same special preservation as the other four main organs? The jury, it seems, is still out on the fate of the humble kidney in the grand scheme of Egyptian afterlife preparations. Once the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines are removed from the body, their journey is far from over. They are not simply discarded. These four organs, essential for the deceased to regain their bodily functions in the afterlife, are destined for their own individual preservation. First, they are typically washed, often with palm wine, to cleanse them. Then comes the crucial step of desiccation. Each organ or organ set is laid out perhaps on a clean mat or in a shallow tray and generously covered with dry natron, that same miraculous salt mixture you'll later use on the entire body. The organs are now off to their own private spa day, with what you might sardonically call Professor Natron's all-natural desiccation salts and eternal rejuvenation treatment. They'll spend many days under this salty blanket, slowly releasing their moisture, shrinking and hardening until they are thoroughly preserved and ready for eternity. Or at least they'll emerge very, very thirsty. This careful removal and separate treatment of the liver, lung, stomach, and intestines is a well-documented historical fact. These specific four were traditionally associated with the four sons of Horus demigods, who protected the deceased's organs and were in turn under the guardianship of specific goddesses. We'll meet these divine guardians and their special containers, the canopic jars, in our next section. A quirky tidbit related to this practice is that sometimes, particularly in later periods of Egyptian history, or for less affluent individuals, the actual preserved organs were not always placed into the canopic jars. Instead, dummy organs artfully crafted from linen sawdust or even mud might be substituted. In other variations, the real organs, once dried and wrapped, were actually placed back inside the now empty body cavity, sometimes with each packet positioned roughly where the organ originally resided, and the canopic jars, if provided, were left empty or filled with symbolic material. The ways of ensuring an eternal afterlife were many and varied, adapting to circumstance and budget. As you extract each organ, you can feel the body becoming perceptibly lighter, hollower. The familiar contours of the torso begin to change, a subtle deflation occurring as its internal scaffolding is removed. The once full cavity is now largely empty, a shadowed space awaiting the next stage of your ministrations, cleansing more natron and eventually packing. But for now, the precious cargo of viscera is set aside and beginning its own vital journey towards preservation under the watchful, dehydrating gaze of the natron. The long days of saline slumber have passed for the organs you so carefully removed back in Section 8. They have lain buried in mounds of dry natron, the miraculous salt patiently drawing out every last vestige of moisture that could invite decay. Now, they emerge transformed, smaller, darker, strangely leathered, yet perfectly preserved, ready for the next stage of their journey towards eternity. Your first task is to gently brush away the clinging natron crystals, a fine salty powder that gets everywhere. Then each organ, the liver, the lungs, the stomach, and the intestines, is treated with the same meticulous care as a miniature mummy. You anoint them with sweet-smelling oils and fragrant resins, perhaps murmuring an incantation or two before carefully wrapping each one in long strips of fine linen, swaddling them tightly into neat, compact bundles. Sometimes small amulets might be tucked within the folds of these wrappings, offering further magical protection. With the precious organ packages prepared, you now turn your attention to their eternal homes, the canopic jars. These aren't just ordinary storage pots. They are sacred vessels, vital components of the burial assemblage designed to house and protect these specific parts of the deceased, ensuring they would be available to magically reconstitute the body in the afterlife. The quality of these jars can vary enormously, reflecting the wealth and status of your client. Some are crafted from humble pottery, others from beautifully carved limestone or calcite, that creamy, translucent stone often called Egyptian alabaster, and occasionally from faience or even wood. Typically, there are 4 jars in a set, each destined for one particular organ bundle, and each distinguished by its uniquely sculpted lid. These lids are not mere decoration. They represent 4 minor deities known collectively as the 4 sons of Horus, who act as divine guardians for the embalmed viscera. This is a central historical fact in mummification. The use of canopic jars dates back to the Old Kingdom, though their lids were initially simpler, often flat or dome-shaped. It was from the First Intermediate Period, or Middle Kingdom onwards, that the iconic lids depicting the heads of the four sons of Horus became standard a tradition that would last for thousands of years. Your role as a knowledgeable embalmer is to ensure that each wrapped organ is placed into its correct designated jar. There's a strict divine protocol to follow. Matching the right organ to the right son of Horus is crucial. You wouldn't want Imseti, for instance, showing up in the afterlife complaining to Osiris that he received the lungs when he was specifically assigned the liver. The gods, and indeed the deceased who depends on their protection, can be so particular about their viscera, you know. First, there is Imseti, who is depicted with a human head. He is the guardian of the liver, and he in turn is protected by the great goddess Isis, wife of Osiris and mother of Horus. You take the wrapped liver, a dense compact bundle, and carefully place it inside Imseti's jar, perhaps whispering a prayer for Isis's benevolent oversight. Next comes Happy, who sports the head of a baboon. Happy is entrusted with the care of the lungs. His divine protector is Nephthys, the sister of Isis, and another key figure in the Osirian mythos. The wrapped lungs, surprisingly light, are settled into Happy's jar. You double-check the lids. Happy the baboon gets the lungs. Yes, the last thing you or anyone needs is an afterlife organ mix-up, resulting in a baboon deity attempting to digest something with a pair of lungs. The celestial paperwork one imagines would be an absolute nightmare. The third son is Duamutef, who has the head of a jackal, much like the god Anubis, who presides over your entire profession. Duamutef is the guardian of the stomach. He is watched over by the ancient goddess Neith, a powerful deity associated with war-weaving and wisdom. The wrapped stomach, now a firm shrunken package, goes into the jackal-headed jar. Finally, there is Kebersenuef, who is distinguished by the noble head of a falcon, reminiscent of Horus himself, or Ra. Kebersenuef's sacred duty is to protect the intestines. His guardian goddess is Serket, or Selkis, the scorpion goddess, often depicted with a scorpion on her head, who is a powerful protector against venomous creatures and evil forces, and also a helper of the dead. The long sausage-like bundle of wrapped intestines is carefully coiled and placed within this final jar. These jars are basically the ancient Egyptian equivalent of very exclusive, very permanent divine Tupperware for your client's eternal organs. Keeps fresh for millennia, guaranteed to help you feast and breathe in the field of reeds, would be a fitting, if anachronistic, advertising slogan. Once each organ is nestled within its jar, the heavy sculpted lids are placed on top, sealing them in their sacred vigil. A quirky tidbit for you: in some very late periods of Egyptian history, or perhaps for individuals of more modest means, the use of actual hollow canopic jars was sometimes dispensed with. Instead, solid, dummy canopic jars, which couldn't actually hold anything, might be included in the tomb for symbolic purposes. In other cases, representations of the four sons of Horus might be painted or molded directly onto the coffin or cartonnage mummy case. And as we mentioned before, sometimes the individually wrapped organs were actually returned to the body cavity, often with each packet placed approximately where the organ originated, and the canopic jars, if present at all, were empty or filled with symbolic chaff or linen. The forms evolved, but the underlying belief in the need to protect these organs and the divine patronage of the four sons of Horus remained remarkably consistent. Once filled and sealed, the four canopic jars are typically placed together in a special container known as a canopic chest. This chest, which could be a simple wooden box or an elaborately decorated shrine, would then be placed within the burial chamber of the tomb, usually near the sarcophagus, ready to serve the deceased in the hereafter. There's ongoing discussion among Egyptologists regarding the precise ritualistic orientation and placement of this canopic chest within the burial chamber, and whether its position, perhaps aligned with certain cardinal directions or specific tomb features, held a deeper cosmological significance in relation to the deceased's journey. With the organs now safely ensconced within their respective jars, under the watchful individualized protection of Imseti Hapi Duamutef and Kebesenuef and their powerful guardian goddesses, this crucial phase of your work is complete. These vital components of the deceased are preserved and accounted for, ready to play their part in the resurrection and eternal sustenance of your client. Your attention can now return to the main event, the now empty shell of the body itself, which awaits its own lengthy and intricate path to mummification. With the precious cargo of the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines now safely ensconced in their respective canopic jars, as we detailed in Section 9, your focus returns to the still form on the embalming slab. The deceased lies before you, now significantly lighter, the abdominal and thoracic cavities largely empty, save for the resilient heart, which usually remains as the anchor of intellect and soul. This echoing void, however, cannot be left as it is. It must be cleansed, purified, and carefully filled to help the body retain a semblance of its living form during the long desiccation process that awaits. You begin by thoroughly cleansing the now empty body cavity. Generous amounts of palm wine, a readily available alcoholic beverage, are sloshed inside. You use your hands or linen cloths to wash away any remaining blood bodily fluids or small tissue fragments. The alcohol in the palm wine acts as a disinfectant and a dehydrating agent, helping to purify the internal surfaces. The sharp, slightly fruity scent of the wine momentarily cuts through the heavier aromas of the wabet. Following the palm wine, the cavity might be rinsed again, perhaps with water infused with spices or aromatic herbs, further cleansing and perfuming the space. Once rinsed, you meticulously dry the inside with fresh linen cloths. Now the crucial stage of packing begins. You're essentially restuffing a human beanbag, but with much higher stakes, considerably more. Fragrant beans and a divine mandate to prevent collapse. And absolutely no one wants a saggy mummy. It's just not a dignified look for eternity. The aim is to fill the void, completely providing internal support, so that when the body is later covered in dry natron for many weeks, the torso doesn't flatten or distort into an unnatural shape. A variety of materials are used for this internal scaffolding, often depending on the wealth of the deceased and the specific traditions of your workshop. Large quantities of linen are a common choice, perhaps offcuts or linen specifically prepared for this purpose. Sometimes it's packed in dry. Other times it's soaked in expensive liquid resins, which will harden and provide even firmer support. Packets of dry natron, securely wrapped in linen bags, might also be placed deep within the cavity to continue drawing out moisture from the inside. Sawdust, often mixed with fragrant resins or spices like cinnamon or myrrh, is another frequently used packing material. This mixture not only fills space, but also helps to control odors and inhibit microbial growth. In some cases, Particularly for wealthier clients, significant quantities of molten resin might be poured directly into the cavity, solidifying into a hard, preserving mass. You carefully stuff these materials into every nook and cranny, ensuring the chest and abdomen are plumped out to something approaching a natural contour. Your official job title might be embalmer, but on days like these, divine interior decorator and sacred seamster feels much more accurate, with perhaps a minor in advanced human taxidermy. The historical fact is that this careful packing of the body cavity was absolutely essential to maintain the body's structural integrity during the lengthy 40-day or so period it would spend entirely covered in dry natron. Without this internal support, the flesh and skin would shrink directly onto the skeleton, resulting in a much more emaciated and less lifelike appearance. The goal was to preserve a recognizable, albeit stylized, human form. Here's a quirky tidbit. For your consideration, the packing process might not always have been a single-stage affair. Some evidence suggests that embalmers might have initially used a temporary, cheaper stuffing, perhaps straw-dried grasses or rougher linen, to support the body during the main desiccation phase under the natron pile. Then, once the body was thoroughly dried, this temporary stuffing would be removed, and a more permanent, finer packing of resin-soaked linen, aromatic herbs, and sawdust would be inserted before the final wrapping began. This two-stage approach would ensure the best possible preservation and form, while perhaps economizing on expensive materials during the initial messier phase. Egyptologists continue to discuss the precise sequence and regional variations in the types of packing materials used inside the body cavity. Was the choice of materials like myrrh cassia, or even onions, sometimes used for their shape to pack smaller areas, purely pragmatic for their structural support, desiccating, or aromatic properties? Or did specific materials also hold deeper ritualistic or symbolic meanings beyond their practical application, perhaps relating to rebirth or purification? The texts are often vague on these specifics, leaving much to interpretation based on archaeological findings. With the cavity now satisfactorily packed, your attention turns to the long incision on the left flank, the gateway you created earlier. It must be meticulously sewn shut. For this, you use a large needle, likely made of bronze or copper, and strong thread, typically spun from linen or sometimes animal sinew. With practiced, precise movements, you begin to stitch the edges of the incision together. The stitch needs to be tight and secure, ensuring the packing materials remain inside and presenting a neat closed appearance. Some embalmers might have used a specific type of stitch, perhaps a strong running stitch, or a kind of shoemaker's stitch, known for its durability. That little stitch-up job has to be perfect. You certainly don't want the client coming apart at the seams in the afterlife. That would be terribly embarrassing for everyone involved and probably lead to some very awkward celestial complaints. Once sewn, the line of stitches isn't just left bare. It's often further sealed and protected. A common practice was to place a plaque or plate over the sutured incision. For everyday clients, this might be a plate made of beeswax. For the wealthy or royal, it could be a thin sheet of bronze, silver, or even gold. Frequently, this sealing plaque would be incised or impressed with the potent symbol of the Wadjet eye, the Eye of Horus, a powerful emblem of protection, healing, and wholeness. This magically sealed the breach, safeguarding the body against any malevolent spirits that might try to enter through this vulnerable point. The body is now in a sense whole again. The internal work is largely complete. The vital organs are preserved and awaiting their journey in the canopic jars. The empty spaces within the torso have been cleansed, filled, and sealed. The deceased is now ready to embark on the next major stage of their transformation, the long, patient immersion in the drying embrace of natron, which will remove the remaining moisture from the flesh and skin, paving the way for the final anointing and intricate wrapping. But that is a story for another part of our journey. For now, a significant chapter of your sacred and often grisly artistry is closed. While the body you so carefully prepared in Section 10 undergoes its long silent slumber in the dehydrating embrace of the natron pile, a process that can take 40 days or more, your work is far from over. There are other crucial elements to prepare, elements that will ensure the deceased is not just preserved, but also properly equipped and identified for their journey into the afterlife. Chief among these is the creation of their eternal face, the death mask. This isn't merely a sentimental portrait. It's a vital spiritual interface, a magical guarantee that the deceased spirit will recognize its earthly vessel and be able to reunite with it. As an embalmer, you might not always be the primary artist who crafts the most elaborate masks. That could be the domain of specialized workshop artisans, goldsmiths, or sculptors, especially if your client is wealthy. However, you would certainly oversee its creation, provide the necessary dimensions, ensure its proper fit, and profoundly understand its sacred function. For less elaborate burials, your direct involvement in fashioning simpler masks from cartonnage or plaster would be more hands-on. You are, after all, responsible for the deceased's complete presentation for eternity. The fundamental purpose of the death mask is to provide a permanent, idealized likeness of the deceased. The ancient Egyptians believed that the Ka, the life force or spiritual double, and the Ba, the soul or personality, often depicted as a human-headed bird, needed to recognize the mummy, to return to it each night, and receive sustenance from the tomb offerings. Without this reunion, the deceased could not hope to achieve resurrection and eternal life in the field of reeds. The mask therefore acted as an unmistakable, unchanging visage. It also served as a magical substitute for the head itself should the actual mummified head become damaged or decay over the vast expanse of time. Furthermore, the painted eyes, nostrils, and mouth on the mask were believed to magically grant the deceased the ability to see, breathe, and speak in the afterlife. The materials used for death masks varied greatly, reflecting the status and resources of the deceased and their family. For many masks were made from cartonnage, layers of linen scraps, or papyrus fragments glued together and coated with gesso, a type of plaster. This pliable material could be molded over a pre-existing form, perhaps a wooden model, or even directly, very carefully, over the linen-wrapped face of the deceased before it was fully desiccated to capture the basic human contours. Once hardened, the cartonnage was then often beautifully painted. Plaster alone could also be used, sometimes molded directly onto the linen wrappings covering the mummy's head, towards the end of the embalming process, creating a more individualized, though still idealized form. But for pharaohs and the highest echelons of nobility, nothing surpassed the divine gleam of precious metals. Gold, considered the flesh of the gods, was the ultimate material. The iconic solid gold mask of Tutankhamun, inlaid with lapis lazuli, carnelian turquoise, and other semi-precious stones, is the most famous example of this, a breathtaking masterpiece of goldsmithing and spiritual symbolism. Silver being rarer in ancient Egypt than gold was also occasionally used and highly prized. You ensure the expression on any mask you oversee is suitably serene and eternal. No one wants to spend eternity looking like they just stubbed their toe on the duat's doorstep after a long and arduous journey. Regardless of the base material, the features depicted on the mask were rarely a true warts-and-all portrait. Instead, they presented an idealized image of the deceased in their prime, youthful calm, and perfect. The face would be smooth, the eyes often wide, and outlined with traditional kohl, the lips gently curved in a serene, knowing smile. The mask might also incorporate elements of divine iconography, such as the nemes, headdress for royalty, a false beard, a symbol of divinity and kingship, even for queens who were pharaohs, or elaborate floral collars. The colors used in painting were also symbolic gold, or yellow for divinity and everlastingness, green for rebirth, like Osiris, black for the fertile soil of the Nile and resurrection, and blue for the heavens and the primeval waters. Getting the likeness just right, or rather, eternally perfect right, is absolutely key. This isn't just some dusty passport photo for the afterlife. It's more like their divine social media profile pick one that's going to be fixed and immutable for millions of years. The historical fact that death masks were considered vital for spiritual survival and transformation is underscored by their prevalence and the incredible artistry invested in them, especially for royalty. While many cultures have used death masks, the ancient Egyptian examples stand out for their profound religious significance and their role as an active component in the machinery of resurrection. Some clients, of course, might opt for the deluxe gold package if their budget allows. It's a bit like them saying, "I fully intend to be so dazzlingly divine in the afterlife that even Osiris himself will need to reach for his celestial sunglasses when I approach." A quirky and perhaps earlier parallel to the function of the mask can be seen in the reserve heads from the Old Kingdom. These were remarkably lifelike, more so than later masks' sculpted stone heads, often made of limestone, which were placed in the burial chamber, usually near the hidden entrance to the serdab statue chamber, or at the bottom of the burial shaft. It's thought they may have served as an alternative resting place or anchor for the Ka if the mummy itself was destroyed or damaged, acting as a kind of spiritual understudy for the head. Once crafted and decorated, the mask is set aside, awaiting the moment when the fully desiccated and anointed body is ready for its final wrapping. It will then be carefully placed over the mummy's wrapped head and shoulders, becoming an integral part of the finished product. The first thing seen, the eternal face presented to gods and spirits. Egyptologists still debate some nuances of the mask's primary function. Was it mainly to provide that idealized, recognizable image for the deceased spirit, or did it also serve as a robust protective casing for the fragile mummified head? Or perhaps more profoundly, did the very materials used, especially gold work, to magically imbue the deceased with divine imperishable properties, transforming them into an Osiris-like being? The truth likely lies in a combination of all these intertwined purposes. For now, your task regarding the mask is complete. It lies ready, a silent, perfect effigy gleaming faintly in the lamplight of the workshop. It is a masterpiece of hope, a shield against oblivion, and a golden ticket, quite literally in some cases, to an eternity of being. This face will soon look out from the wrappings, a calm and unchanging gaze prepared for a journey beyond the confines of mortal time, ready for the grand unveiling in the Hall of Two Truths. The day finally arrives after what seems like an eternity, but is typically around 40 long days, when the body is brought forth from its deep slumber in the natron beds. The salt has done its sacred work. The form that was once soft and yielding is now incredibly desiccated stiff, much lighter in weight, and a strange, leathery brownish gray. The scent of natron, a dry, almost desert-like aroma, clings to it, a stark contrast to the richer, more organic smells of the earlier stages. Your first task is to meticulously brush away every last crystal of natron from the skin, from every fold and crevice. This is essential, as any remaining salt could continue to corrode the tissues over time. Once cleansed of the natron, the body is ready for its final anointing. This isn't just a quick wipe down. You and your assistants will carefully massage fragrant and preserving oils and resins into the parched skin. Cedar oil juniper, oil palm oil, myrrh, frankincense. These precious substances are liberally applied. This helps to restore a degree of suppleness, a very relative term here, to the skin, making it less brittle for the wrapping process, and also perfumes the body, further sanctifying it and masking any lingering odors of desiccation. Any final cosmetic touches might be applied now. Perhaps artificial eyes, made of stone or painted linen, are inserted into the sockets if the originals have shrunken too much, or small pads of linen are placed in the cheeks to give a more rounded, lifelike appearance. The sunken areas are carefully plumped. Now begins one of the longest, most painstaking, and visually transformative stages of the entire mummification, the wrapping. This is where the body truly becomes a mummy in the iconic sense. You'll need linen, and lots of it. Hundreds of square yards, sometimes even more, for a particularly elaborate burial. The quality of the linen can vary, the finest, almost sheer material for the innermost layers that touch the skin, and coarser, sturdier linen for the outer bulk. Often this linen is recycled. Old household sheets, discarded temple vestments, all given a new sacred purpose. Your apprentices get really good at tearing this linen into perfectly even strips of various widths and lengths. It's not exactly a skill they'd boast about at the local beer house, but here in the Wabet, it makes them highly valued linen-tearing rock stars. The wrapping is a meticulous art, performed with a combination of ritual precision and practical skill. It's not just a case of randomly winding bandages. Each finger and toe is wrapped individually, first tiny digits, carefully cocooned in their own linen shells. Then the limbs, arms and legs, are separately encased, layer upon layer, building up their form. Finally, the torso and head are wrapped, integrating the limbs into a cohesive, tightly bound whole. You're essentially creating the world's most elaborate, divinely protected, and very, very permanent sleeping bag. Except the occupant isn't planning on waking up for a casual camping trip anytime soon, if ever. As the layers build up, liquid resin, often warmed to make it more fluid, is frequently painted or poured between the linen strips. This acts as a powerful adhesive, sticking the layers together, and upon cooling and hardening, forming a rigid, almost carapace-like shell around the body. This provides further protection against moisture insects and physical disturbance. The aim is to create an immobile, perfectly defined human shape, a secure and lasting vessel for the spirit. And now, the death mask you so carefully oversaw or created back in Section 11 is brought forth. With great reverence, it is positioned over the wrapped head and shoulders of the mummy. Its serene golden or painted gaze stares out an eternal watchfulness. More linen strips are then used to secure the mask firmly in place, binding it seamlessly into the overall mummy bundle, its edges disappearing under subsequent layers. It becomes the true face of the mummy, the focal point of its identity. But the wrapping isn't just about linen and resin. It's also a crucial opportunity to embed magical protection directly onto the body. Dozens, sometimes even hundreds of amulets are strategically placed within the linen layers as the wrapping proceeds. Each amulet has a specific purpose and is often made of faience stone or precious metal. The Ankh symbol of life might be placed near the throat or held in the hand. The Djed pillar, representing stability and the backbone of Osiris, is often laid on the chest. The Eye of Horus. The powerful Wadjet eye offers protection and healing and can be found in many locations. Scarab beetles, symbols of rebirth and transformation, are particularly important. A large heart scarab, often inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead, asking the heart not to testify against the deceased during judgment, is placed over the heart. The Tayet knot, the symbol of Isis, offers her protection. These are just a few examples. The array of potential amulets is vast. As you and your team work meticulously winding the bandages, a lector priest, the Kerheb, might stand nearby, reading aloud powerful spells and incantations from sacred texts like the Book of the Dead. These words of power are believed to infuse the mummy and its wrappings with magical efficacy, providing the deceased with the knowledge and protection needed to navigate the perilous journey through the Duat, the underworld, and to pass the final judgment. Sometimes, key spells are also written directly onto the linen strips themselves before they are used. The historical fact is that this entire wrapping process was incredibly time-consuming, often taking around 15 days to complete and using truly astonishing quantities of linen. It was a labor of devotion and intense focus. By the end of it, the mummy is so tightly bound and layered, it makes a modern circus contortionist look like they have serious commitment issues with their poses. This is eternal commitment to maintaining form and integrity. A quirky tidbit that adds a touch of humanity to this otherwise highly ritualized process. Sometimes small personal items belonging to the deceased were tucked into the wrappings by family members or by the embalmers themselves. This could be a favorite small tool for a craftsman, a beloved childhood toy, found with a young mummy, a scribe's palette, or even a mummified pet cat or bird wrapped and placed alongside its owner. These poignant inclusions speak to the desire to send the departed off with familiar comforts. Egyptologists still debate the precise ritual order and symbolic meaning behind the placement of specific amulets at different locations on the body during the wrapping process. While some placements are common and their rationale clear, like the heart scarab, the logic behind others can be more elusive. Textual instructions can be varied or incomplete, leading to interpretations based on observed patterns in excavated mummies and a deep understanding of religious symbolism. Finally, after many days of meticulous winding, anointing, and amulet tucking, the task is done. The mummy lies before you, a still cocoon-like form, no longer recognizable as the individual it once was, but transformed into a powerful, magically charged vessel. It is a solid, almost sculptural object, swathed in endless layers of linen, its human shape perfectly preserved and protected, ready for the final journey into its coffin and then into the silent darkness of the tomb. You step back finally from the newly wrapped mummy. It lies before you, a silent, imposing form, a testament to days, even weeks, of your meticulous labor. From the initial confronting reality of a cooling corpse to this tightly bound, resin-coated, and amulet-protected vessel of eternity, you have guided its physical transformation. The air in the wabbit is thick with the scent of oils, resins, and ancient linen, a perfume you've long since become accustomed to, as we've discussed. Your hands are stained, your muscles ache, but there's a profound, if somber, satisfaction in the work. You've played your part, a crucial one, in the grand Egyptian cosmic drama of death and rebirth. Yet, as you survey your handiwork, a masterpiece of preservation and ritual preparation, you are keenly aware of your station in this intricate society. Despite the undeniably sacred nature of your service, despite the fact that pharaohs and peasants alike depend on your unique skills for their safe passage into the afterlife, you are not hailed as a holy priest, not in the same revered category as those who serve daily in the sun-drenched temples, chanting hymns to Ra, or tending the cult statue of Amun. No, you, the WTJW, the embalmer, are primarily considered a highly skilled craftsman, an artisan plying a very specialized and frankly rather grim trade. The distinction is significant. Priests, the Wab pure ones, or the Kerheb lector priest who recites the sacred texts, generally operate within the sanctified precincts of temples. They perform public rituals, interpret divine will, and mediate between the human and divine realms, all while maintaining a high degree of ritual purity. Your workshop, the Wabet, though often called the Pure Place or House of Vitality, is fundamentally different. It's a place of intense hands-on interaction with death decay and potent chemicals, the very antithesis of the pristine purity required for direct temple service. Remember that overwhelming clinging scent from Section 2 and the tomb-like toxic embrace of your workshop from Section 3. Those are not the calling cards of a temple-dwelling holy man. This perception is rooted in several factors. The most obvious is the inherent ritual impurity associated with your work. Your daily intimate contact with corpses, blood, and the processes of decomposition, even in the service of arresting that decay, inevitably marks you. While a priest might undergo elaborate purification rituals before entering a temple, your entire profession is steeped in what others might consider defiling substances. Then there's the nature of the labor itself. Yours is a manual skill, often messy, physically demanding, and involving techniques passed down through apprenticeships, much like carpentry, pottery, or metalworking. Priestly duties, while also requiring extensive training in hymns, rituals, and theology, often involve less direct physical grime and more intellectual or performative roles. So you're the one who literally holds the keys to a recognized eternity in your skilled hands, the one who ensures the K and Ba have a preserved body to return to, yet at the Grand Temple Gala. If you were even invited, you'd likely find yourself seated much closer to the kitchen entrance than to the high priest or the local nomarch. Essential but slightly smelly isn't usually a VIP category, it seems. You don't get to wear the leopard skin of a Sem priest or a fancy stargazing headdress. Your main perks are an unparalleled knowledge of human internal geography, a lifetime supply of slightly used and sometimes heavily incensed linen, and the ability to clear a crowded market path with your unique personal aroma, as we explored in Section 4. Of course, there's a hierarchy within your own profession. The chief embalmer, perhaps one bearing the prestigious title Hari Seshta, the Master of Secrets, especially if attached to the royal necropolis or a major cult center like Abydos, would command considerable respect and wealth. Such a figure might indeed possess deep knowledge of sacred texts and rituals, blurring the lines somewhat between artisan and religious specialist. They would oversee the entire operation, manage a team of assistants, and liaise with high-status clients. But for you, the skilled practitioner, toiling day in and day out in a more modest workshop, your status is more firmly in the craftsman camp. You are paid for your services, usually in kind, measures of grain jars of beer or wine bolts of cloth, perhaps some silver deben if the client is well off. The price negotiated based on the elaborateness of the mummification, chosen from the top-tier 70-day process to more expedited budget-friendly options. This is a key historical fact. Embalmers were skilled professionals who often learned their trade through familial inheritance, passing down specialized knowledge and techniques from father to son or master to apprentice. While their work was undeniably crucial for Egyptian religious beliefs and practices, their social classification generally placed them among the artisan class, distinct from and usually subordinate to the established priestly orders who managed temple estates and officiated at public ceremonies. A quirky tidbit that hints at the professional organization of your trade embalmers might have formed loose associations or even rudimentary guilds in certain areas. These wouldn't be formal charter-wielding organizations in the modern sense, but rather networks where specialized knowledge was shared or jealously guarded. Apprentices were trained. Perhaps prices and standards of practice were informally regulated, and maybe even where disputes were settled. You might have your own local patron deities, lesser gods, or spirits specifically associated with the craft of preservation, who you'd honor in your own small way, beyond the universal reverence for the great Anubis lord of the necropolis. When people say, "It's a dirty job, but someone's got to do it," they're probably thinking of someone exactly like you. You just sometimes wish that someone got a little more of the divine street cred and perhaps some form of hazard pay for dealing with things like well-liquefied brain matter and the constant risk of poking yourself with a natron-encrusted implement. There is ongoing scholarly discussion about the extent to which high-level embalmers, especially those with access to restricted mortuary literature and titles like Master of Secrets of the Embalming Place, could indeed blur the lines between craftsman and priest, particularly when their duties explicitly involved the recitation of potent incantations, the consecration of amulets, or the performance of rites typically associated with priestly functions. Did their ritual authority elevate their status beyond that of a mere artisan? It's a fascinating gray area in the complex tapestry of Egyptian social and religious structures. But for you, as you prepare to hand over the perfectly wrapped mummy to the family or to the priests who will conduct the funerary rites, the paradox of your position is clear. You perform an absolutely indispensable service, one that underpins the entire belief system regarding eternal life. Without your skilled hands, the journey to the field of reeds would be impossible. Yet you remain on the fringes, a master of a dark, essential art, respected for your skill, perhaps, but not revered as holy. Your reward is the knowledge of a job well done, a body perfectly preserved, and the continuation of a tradition stretching back into the mists of time. And of course, the ever-present, unforgettable perfume of your profession. The final farewell to the mummy you so painstakingly prepared is often a quiet, almost distant affair for you. You might see the funeral procession, the wailing mourners, the priests in their white linens, the funerary boat beginning its symbolic journey across the Nile towards the West Bank, the land of the dead. But you are rarely a central part of these public lamentations. Your work, the intimate, messy, and transformative core of these preparations, is done. As the procession recedes, carrying your handiwork towards its eternal resting place, your thoughts might drift to your own inevitable end and the peculiar place you occupy in this society that so reveres the afterlife you help guarantee. We've touched upon it before, this pervasive label of unclean that clings to you as stubbornly as the scent of natron and myrrh. It's not about a lack of personal hygiene in the way we might think of it today. It's about ritual impurity, the BWT, an invisible but potent stain acquired from your constant necessary engagement with death and the processes of decomposition. Even though your ultimate aim is purification and preservation, the journey there involves traversing territories most Egyptians would assiduously avoid. This spiritual taint in the eyes of many sets you apart. This means that the social shunning we discussed earlier, the subtle parting of crowds in the marketplace, the hesitation in a stranger's handshake, the careful distance maintained by those not in your immediate circle, is a persistent feature of your life. You enable countless souls to approach their gods in a state of ritual purity, yet you yourself might be barred from certain temple precincts or full participation in communal sacred rites that demand absolute cleanliness. It's a profound irony. You are the gatekeeper to a pure eternity for others, yet you walk a path deemed impure by many in this earthly existence. You handle the most sacred transition of human experience, the very fulcrum between life and the hereafter, yet you are kept at arm's length. Your dream of a grand family mausoleum surrounded by generations of your kin in a blissful afterlife, probably not on the cards for you. Not in the main family plot, anyway. You'll likely get a nice spot in what you might sardonically call the Artisans of the Afterlife Annex, conveniently located downwind from everyone else. This leads to the somber reality of your own burial. When your time comes, after a life spent meticulously preparing others for their tombs, you will likely not be laid to rest alongside your cleaner relatives in a multi-generational family sepulcher if they have one. Embalmers, like other necropolis workers, the tomb builders, the painters, the stone cutters, the coffin makers, often had their own designated burial grounds. These cemeteries were typically situated on the West Bank, often near the very necropolises, where you toiled, sometimes even in the shadow of the grand tombs you helped prepare for others. The historical fact is that communities of necropolis workers, such as the famed village of Deir el-Medina, Setmat, Her Imenti Waset, the place of truth in the west of Thebes, had their own distinct cemeteries. These were self-contained communities of highly skilled artisans who built and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings and Valley of the Queens. Their tombs, while often smaller and less ostentatious than those of the royalty and nobles they served, were still carefully constructed and decorated, reflecting their own beliefs and aspirations for the afterlife. This separation in death mirrored their somewhat set-apart status in life. The quality of your own mummification and tomb will naturally depend on your professional success and personal wealth. A highly respected chief embalmer, a master of secrets, might afford a well-decorated rock-cut tomb, complete with a fine coffin, a decent set of canopic jars, and perhaps even a modest array of funerary goods. A journeyman embalmer or a workshop assistant might have a much simpler burial, perhaps a pit grave with a more basic mummification, but you would certainly hope for a proper preservation. Who embalms the embalmer? Your colleagues, your apprentices, your sons, if they follow you into the trade. They will apply the skills you taught them, hopefully with the same diligence and care you showed your own clients. You just have to hope they remember all your particular preferences for the afterlife. Extra resin on the left flank. If you please go easy on the nostril hook this time. And for the love of Anubis, use the good linen, not that scratchy stuff we save for the budget burials. Dokiguestar Nessinger Bahan. A quirky and rather poignant tidbit. The tombs of some embalmers, though perhaps modest in scale, have been found to contain tools of their trade. Miniature model embalming blades, small bags representing natron, or even tiny model canopic jars. It's as if they wish to identify their profession proudly even in the afterlife, or perhaps to magically equip themselves to continue their essential work should Osiris or Anubis require their skilled services in the underworld. Maybe it's just to ensure they have the right tools, if their own mummification needs a touch-up down the line. Egyptologists continue to debate the primary reasons behind the separate burial of necropolis workers. Was it solely due to concepts of ritual impurity and rigid social stratification, a way of keeping the unclean professions physically separate even in death? Or did it also reflect a strong sense of communal identity and professional pride among these highly specialized artisans, a conscious choice to be buried amongst their peers? Those who truly understood the nature and importance of their shared craft and life on the edge of eternity. It's likely a complex interplay of both factors. So, you live with this enduring paradox. You are absolutely vital to the core spiritual beliefs and practices of your entire civilization. Yet you are simultaneously viewed with a degree of caution, even aversion, by the very people who will one day depend on your skills for their own eternal peace. It's the ultimate irony. You spend your life getting others ready for the best eternal address, ensuring their smooth entry into the field of reeds. But your own afterlife forwarding address is likely to be in a slightly less glamorous, more specialized neighborhood of the necropolis. You accept this perhaps with a sigh, perhaps with a quiet pride in your unique and indispensable role. You are a guardian of the threshold, a servant of Anubis, a craftsman of eternity, destined to walk a solitary path, both in this life and it seems in your own journey into the West. So the next time you find yourself wandering through the hushed, dimly lit halls of a museum, perhaps drawn by the undeniable mystique of ancient Egypt, you might pause before a glass case. Inside, a human form lies still swathed in ancient linen, its features perhaps covered by a serene golden mask, or its desiccated face gazing out with an unnerving placidity from millennia past. You see a mummy, an artifact, a relic of a bygone civilization, a testament to a fascinating belief system. But as you stand there, looking at this silent voyager from an ancient land, try to peel back the layers not just of linen, but of time and perception. Look beyond the gold, beyond the hieroglyphs, beyond the sheer age of it all, and spare a thought for the mummy's unseen maker. Remember the journey we've taken together through these past 14 sections. Picture that anonymous ancient Egyptian embalmer, the WTJW, whose life was a constant negotiation between the sacred and the profane. Think of him, or perhaps even her, though it was a predominantly male profession, beginning the day enveloped in death's eternal perfume, that inescapable olfactory signature we explored in Section 2, a scent that clung to him through the crowded streets and perhaps isolated him, even from his own family, as we considered in Section 4 and Section 14. Imagine him toiling within the tomb's toxic embrace, the dark, stuffy workshop, detailed in Section 3, breathing in natron dust, resin fumes, and the lingering miasma of decay day after weary day. Consider the sheer grit required. Recall the daunting and delicate task of preparing for and then executing that nasal brain extraction as we walk through in Sections 5 and 6. That iron hook, that careful, unsettling work to remove what was deemed mere cranial stuffing. Picture the steady hand making that critical abdominal incision. We saw in Section 7 opening the body to begin the careful, methodical removal of the organs which were then meticulously preserved in natron, as detailed in Section 8, before being entrusted to the vigil of the canopic jars under the watch of Horus's 4 sons in Section 9. Think of the meticulous cleansing of the now empty body cavity, the careful packing with linen, sawdust, and resins to maintain a lifelike form, and the precise stitching of the incision, often sealed with a sacred plaque, a process we uncovered in Section 10. Envision the artistry and profound spiritual significance behind the mask of eternity, as discussed in Section 11, crafted to provide a perfect, recognizable face for the soul's return. And then, the almost unimaginable patience involved in applying linen's endless layers, as we saw in Section 12, wrapping the body for weeks, incorporating protective amulets and sacred spells, transforming it into a secure vessel for its journey through the underworld. When you're looking at that perfectly preserved individual, remember that someone, a skilled craftsman, rather than a revered priest, as we noted in Section 13, had to essentially perform a full internal redecoration and then gift wrap a human for what they hoped would be a successful eternity. And they probably didn't get a 5-star papyrus review that went viral on the temple notice board, just a quiet nod of acceptance from the grieving family, and hopefully fair payment in grain cloth or beer. Many of the intricate details of mummification, including the specific tools used and the precise sequence of these elaborate procedures, have been painstakingly pieced together through a combination of ancient textual sources, like the accounts of Herodotus or Diodorus Siculus, alongside the invaluable insights gained from archaeological excavation of embalming workshops and tombs, and of course, the direct scientific analysis of mummies themselves using modern techniques like CT scanning and DNA analysis. This is a crucial historical fact. Our understanding is built on layers of evidence, much like the mummies themselves. Imagine the job satisfaction, though, in a wry, ancient Egyptian sort of way. Your spouse asks, "So what did you accomplish at the Wabet today, my dear?" And you reply, "Oh, nothing much, just ensured Lord Nakhtumen can successfully navigate the 12 gates of the Duat, face the judgment of Osiris, and achieve eternal life as a blessed Ak. Pulled a brain out, through a nose stitched up a flank, and used about 50 cubits of prime linen. You know the usual Tuesday. It certainly beats an afternoon spent endlessly grinding grain or patching fishing nets, perhaps. A quirky, though rarely proven tidbit, some scholars suggest that embalmers, perhaps with an eye to quality control or ensuring their workshop's handiwork was recognized, or if things went wrong, properly attributed, might have occasionally left inconspicuous maker's marks or identifying symbols on linen tags tucked deep within the wrappings or on small unseen parts of the coffin. It's a tantalizing idea, these almost invisible signatures of ancient artisans. So as you stand before that mummy, remember the individual whose hands performed these tasks. They weren't just nameless, faceless automatons. They were people who lived, breathed, perhaps loved and laughed, and who endured incredibly challenging working conditions to fulfill a vital societal and religious role. Scholars continue to explore the extent to which these embalmers held deep personal religious convictions about the profound efficacy of their work versus viewing it primarily as a highly skilled, albeit uniquely unpleasant trade passed down through generations with the more overtly ritual aspects, perhaps performed by rote or by accompanying lector priests who specialized in the incantations. The serene, often golden mask gazes out, concealing the arduous, messy, and profoundly human effort that went into its creation and the preservation of what lies beneath. So yes, next time you visit a museum and admire a perfectly preserved mummy gleaming under the soft lights, spare a thought for the poor guy who had to pull that brain out. Spare a thought for the one who endured the smell of death forever. Their skill, their stomach of steel, and their dedication are the reasons that ancient face can still meet your gaze across the millennia. And now, as our story of the ancient Egyptian embalmer draws to a close, let the vivid images of the wabet, the natron, the resins, and the endless linen begin to soften and recede from your mind's eye. The intense focus required for such intricate and often unsettling work can now give way to a more gentle contemplation. The sharp scents of the embalming chamber fade, replaced by the quiet hum of your own present moment, perhaps the soft whir of a fan, or the distant muffled sounds of the world outside your window. Imagine instead the profound silence of a sealed tomb deep beneath the desert sands, where the mummy rests a still sentinel awaiting a dawn that exists beyond our mortal understanding of time. The anxieties and toils of the embalmer, their daily proximity to death, their social isolation, all these have long since dissolved into the dust of ages. What remains is the product of their incredible skill, a quiet testament to a civilization's powerful belief in eternity and the enduring human desire to be remembered, to continue to transcend. The mummy itself, once a source of such intense focused activity, now lies in perfect repose. The journey through the underworld for which it was so carefully prepared is a narrative woven into its very being, in the amulets tucked within its wrappings, in the spells whispered over it, in the serene and idealized face of its mask. And the embalmer, that unsung artisan of the afterlife, also found their rest, perhaps in a humbler tomb, amongst their peers, their life's work done. So, as you drift towards sleep, let any unsettling thoughts dissolve like salt in water. Feel a sense of peace for that ancient soul, and for the dedicated hands that prepared it. The story is told. The work is complete. All is quiet now. Let the soft darkness be a comforting blanket, and may your dreams be tranquil and serene, untouched by the harsher realities of the ancient world, filled only with a gentle wonder. Sweet dreams.